So welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you for ending the stigmas on post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And we are grateful to have Jeniffer here with us as well. Myself, I am Patricia Wenskunas, the founder CEO of Crime Survivors, and we provide support and guidance to victims of violent crime. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeniffer so that she can introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Jeniffer Zowada. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a clinical supervisor at Casa de la Familia. And I'm gonna talk to you about PTSD.
Good. And so we're going to just go back and forth a little bit. I'm going to ask Jeniffer some questions and she's going to answer them. And again, if you have questions, put them in the chat section or raise your hand. I probably will fill in a little bit as well. But Jeniffer, can you tell us a little bit about yourself above and beyond already your introduction?
Sure. So I've been a licensed therapist for going on 8 years now. I run a private practice of my own in Long Beach, where I see a variety of people on my own. And then, like I said, I supervise clinicians at Casa de la Familia, where, so I supervise them giving direct contact to their own clients. So that could be domestic violence, it could be human trafficking, a lot of trauma work, but they do a lot of trauma work there. I have 2 kids and 2 dogs and a cat. I love to garden. Just tell you a little bit about that I'm a real person, not just here to tell you about trauma. But yeah, I'm from Southern California, born and raised. I don't think I could ever go anywhere else. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, it's good to be able to talk a little bit beyond the profession as well, so that people do know that you're real, that you have your own family, you have your friends, you have your own struggles. We all do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I know myself as the founder of the organization, but above and beyond that, I'm a survivor. I'm somebody that also was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety and depression, and an eating disorder as well. And so I know that walk and that journey of PTSD as well. And so it's good to talk about it and share it, because I think that it can really give hope and healing to other victims or other individuals that are struggling with PTSD.
Absolutely. I too am a survivor of sexual assault. And so I speak from not only a clinical perspective of telling you what I know as a clinician and as a supervisor, but also from what I know as a survivor and having had a trauma.
And thank you for that. And that's also, you know, a lot of people still think that stigmas come with victimization. And a lot of people are not able to share their victimization, sometimes because of the stigmas.
Yes.
Some people don't want to talk about PTSD and all of that because of the stigmas of what we're talking about today. But it's okay to share. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I went through this, but I'm surviving, I'm thriving, or I'm triggered. I'm, having to talk about it, right?
Yes. And I think reducing that stigma around PTSD, around having experienced a trauma is so important, because part of reducing that is we need people to talk about it. We need people to be honest about it and open, so that other people then feel that, okay, you know what, this person shared that, I can talk about it too. And when we hear someone's story, every time you hear someone's story, it helps to reduce the stigma. It helps to realize that real people are having these experiences. People are experiencing this when they share their story with you. When you share your story with someone, it's empowering. It's empowering for the survivor to be able to share their story, and for you to be able to listen, or vice versa.
And they might not share it at that moment, but when you share your trauma or your victimization or your PTSD with someone, it may, like, the light bulb might go off for them at that moment. And then it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it may never be, but they could eventually come back and say to you, you know, Jeniffer, thank you so much for sharing what happened to you, because this and this happened to me.
Absolutely.
which opens up the dialogue and conversation to
Yes.
share. And when you open up the conversation, it allows the healing process to begin and to start.
And it may be that they just need to hear someone share that story, and that may give them that extra push to go get help or to go and talk to someone else. It may be that they don't even come back to you necessarily, but it may be that that gives them that extra push to say, you know what, I'm gonna start to talk about this. I want to start to talk to someone. I want to go and start to work on this. You know, I can see that the person I was just talking to obviously is able to talk about this now. I want to get to that place. And you're right, it may be a very long time before you hear that, and you may never hear that. But it may be that just extra little push that they need.
And since we're diving right into it quickly.
I know.
Right? Why don't we talk about, you know, PTSD? You've heard about PTSD, you know, it attributed to veterans. That was always the conversation in the dialogue.
Yes.
But, you know, you hear PTSD, then you hear post-traumatic stress disorder, and some people don't put them together. But let's get to the basics and just what is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD?
So PTSD is just the acronym for post-traumatic stress disorder. That's exactly what it is. And most oftentimes we do talk about it as PTSD. It when it came about, when we actually came to having diagnostic criteria for it, is, you're right, they were looking at it in terms of post-war veterans. They were looking at it in terms of when they were coming home from war, that they were experiencing what initially they would call shell shock. And that they were coming home and they were having nightmares. They were reliving what they had experienced in the war. They were having flashbacks. They were having memories that they felt like they were actually in that place again, that they could be sitting in their own home. But it was like they really were experiencing, like they were in that very place that they had been. They were in the war. They were experiencing it all over again, like it was happening right then. And along with that is we really see a lot of severe anxiety. So whether that it may look like that they aren't able to leave their home, they're so, you know, they are hyper vigilant in knowing what's going on all the time, being aware of their surroundings, being aware of sounds. So a heightened sense of security, you know, knowing where you are, looking around, hearing everything. And almost kind of feeling like you're keyed up and just on edge all the time. So like when we would say hypervigilance, like just that you're constantly in this hyper arousal, this feeling of being constantly on edge and just hyper aware of everything. And talking about having a lot of time, we're looking at having nightmares, flashbacks of and reoccurring. So having the same ones, it's like you're experiencing it again, like I said, not just when you're awake, but when you're asleep. And we talk about PTSD not just in the form of when someone's coming back from war. Yes, that's absolutely a very big one, but it doesn't have to, it's not just that. We talk about it with anything that is experienced as a trauma. And whether that trauma happens directly to you, so whether you were the victim of this crime or this trauma, it's also if you witnessed a trauma. So it may not even be just that it happened directly to you. It may be that you witnessed something, that you observed something. And kind of an example of that is, I don't know how old all of you are in here, but if you experienced 9/11, you know, and whether you were in New York and experienced it, or you were at home and you saw it on your television, even for those days after, is that all of us that experienced to some level a little bit of PTSD, because we were constantly bombarded with the images of what had happened, the images of what continued to happen, and this very real and very traumatic natural disaster that occurred. And it affected every single one of us. And to varying degrees. And that's another piece of PTSD, is that it doesn't look the same for everyone. Not everyone is going to experience all of the symptoms in the same way or to the same degree. And so, you know, talking about, it can be a natural disaster. It could be a serious accident. It could be a terrorist act.
Well,
Like,
most like families of murder, survivors of
yes,
attempted murder, rape, domestic
yes,
violence,
sexual
sexual
assault, rape,
child abuse.
murder, any crime that happens, that most likely there's going to be trauma that's associated with that. And that is 100% natural. So if you're experiencing PTSD from that, that's 100% normal and natural. That's your body's reaction to that. And we talked about stigmas, and that you don't have any control over the way that your body responds to a trauma. There is absolutely no way to control that. Your body trauma affects you on a cellular level. And so what that means is that your body is going to hold on to that. Your body holds on to that trauma, and that's where it comes from. So you may think like, oh, thinking wise, you're like, no, it didn't affect me. No, I'm fine. I'm good. But your body holds on to that. And that's a lot of times where these symptoms start to come from, is not from you thinking about it necessarily, but it's from the body keeping that and then exerting these symptoms that we're seeing.
Well, and that's what we talked about. What is EMDR and can it help with PTSD? You know, like, what is EMDR? Like, so many people will say, well, go get EMDR for PTSD. Well, but what is EMDR? How am I going to go get EMDR? And then you got PTSD, and then people are putting them together. So it's like, you know, what is EMDR?
So EMDR is the acronym stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Now, what happens with EMDR? Now, first of all, to have EMDR therapy, you have to go to someone who has been specifically trained in EMDR. And EMDR training is extensive. They specifically do just that type of therapy. Now, what it is to help to get to those pieces of the trauma, to work through that, to help you to refocus that. I know that EMDR is something that's talked about a lot. It's not the only way that we look at trauma. Like, it's not the only thing, it's not the only lens that we look through or the only treatment that we do. It has gained a lot of traction in the treatment world, but it's definitely not the only.
Right. And it can work for some, and it can work.
Absolutely.
And it may not work for others, but I agree. Like, you know, you have to be open to do the EMDR therapy, but you have to be open to do any therapy. And I'm not a huge fan of just rushing right into EMDR. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a professional, but I think starting with a therapist and having that dialogue first before you jump into the EMDR. But what are some things for PTSD that you would suggest and recommend to the people that are on today?
So I would recommend, first and foremost, and I feel like I have to say this because I 100% believe it, but is that it starts with therapy, like being open to go to therapy for it. It's not something that you're going to work through on your own. And that's not by fault of anyone. It's just, you can't work through it on your own. You're going to need support in it. And you're going to need ways to learn coping strategies and ways to learn how to increase your support system. And also, I would say, I know I'm kind of getting off track, but we'll talk about how to help your support system to help you also, because that's really key. But first and foremost, I think, therapy is a huge component in this. And finding a therapist that you feel comfortable with. This is something that I always talk to new clients about, is that you have to feel comfortable with your therapist, and you have to be able to trust your therapist. And so and I just want all of you to hear this, but if you go and you meet with a therapist and you don't feel a connection, or you don't feel like there's someone that you can trust, or that you can even maybe build trust with, they're not the right therapist for you. And there are so many therapists out there. And so I just always, and I tell my clients this, don't feel like just because you came and saw me in intake that you're stuck with me for life, right? Like, If you don't feel like there's something there, or you don't feel like this is a good working relationship, then find someone that is. Because, and especially if you're going to work on trauma, because you are going to need to be able to fully trust that person and be able to take things that you maybe have never talked about, things that are so incredibly personal to you, and be able to share them with this person and allow them to walk alongside you on this journey of healing.
Well, I always say to people, if you go to make an appointment with a therapist, interview your therapist.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to interview them and ask them questions and make sure you're comfortable. And don't worry if you feel like, well, I don't want to offend them if I don't go back.
No.
That's not, you're not there to be friends with your therapist. You're not there to develop a relationship with your therapist on any means. Sometimes it could take 3 or 5 therapists before you find the right one. Don't give up.
Yep.
Find the right one and keep going to that person. And even if you go for a month or 2 months, and you may go for a year, and then something could change and you feel like you're at a standstill and you're not growing beyond anymore.
Yes.
You might consider finding a different one or a support group or something else to be able to try for a while or take a break, because that you shouldn't be going to therapy for 20 years to the same therapist.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And really, like, and I say this for myself, I won't speak for all therapists, but for myself, I would much rather you, as my client or as a potential client, that you get what you need and that you feel comfortable with me, than you staying with me just out of obligation or because you feel like you don't want to hurt my feelings or you don't want to hurt. I would much rather be able to give you referrals and give you opportunity to find someone that absolutely works for you than you staying with me and not getting what you need out of that. And Patricia, you're absolutely right. Therapy is an ebb and flow. And so, you may work really well with your first therapist for a year, 6 months, whatever it may be, but then you may outgrow that. Mm-hmm. Or you may feel like you were talking about EMDR. You may start with a therapist and start, excuse me, maybe it's through a trauma-informed lens, but then a year later, you're like, there's still this piece that I'm really stuck in. I think I'm going to try EMDR now. Or I want to try a different type. Maybe I want to try a group therapy now, or maybe I want to try this. That's always okay. Absolutely.
And I think it's recognizing and acknowledging and the feelings and the thoughts that you have, especially with PTSD. And sometimes you may not even know it. And sometimes you may think, well, I'm depressed, or I'm sad, or I'm anxious, or I'm having a night terror, or trigger, or any of those kind of things.
Yes.
Acknowledge them and recognize them, and don't keep them to yourself.
Absolutely.
Talk to a friend, talk to a family member maybe about it, but also talk to a professional and let them let you know if you have depression or anxiety or PTSD, or maybe it's just a moment. Maybe you don't have a diagnosis of anything and you're just having a day, a bad day.
Yes. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the thing, we talk about PTSD, and one of the things I think we had talked about was if it goes away or if it comes back or what that looks like. And, you just because, whether you've gotten a diagnosis of PTSD or whether, you maybe are looking at it and you're like, oh, I meet that criteria, I meet those things. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have days or times when you're doing really well. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be that experience or it's always going to look the same. Now, can I tell you that you'll never have triggers again? I can't tell you that, because that is not true. You may have triggers but the thing is, part of the goal is that you will have been able to learn ways to better manage that, ways to better come down from that, ways that you have learned to reach out, like Patricia was saying, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, but you learn ways that you can ask for what you need in those moments, or you can do something that helps you because you recognize, okay, this is one of my triggers. What can I do now to help with this? Or what can I do to kind of come out of this moment?
And PTSD is not a lifetime diagnosis that you're stuck with. You may be diagnosed with PTSD today, and then in 30 days or 6 months or a year, you just may have nothing. You may not need it. You may not need medication. You may not need therapy. But then again, you could be diagnosed today, and then in a year, you could be good for about a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then all of a sudden something could have triggered you,
Yes.
and all of a sudden it comes back, correct?
Yes. Yes. And that's, and that in part too is knowing kind of that ebb and flow again, is that you may feel like, you know, you did really well in therapy, and you know that your therapist is like, yeah, or maybe you're like, yeah, I'm ready to just move forward and like take what I've learned and move on. And you may do that, and like you're saying, like it may be a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 10 years, you know, and you're just like going along and you're doing your thing, and then you have a trigger, or then something happens. That doesn't mean that you're back to where you started. That doesn't mean that you have to start over. That just means, hey, let me recognize this, and maybe I do need to seek therapy again. Maybe I do need to just have a little refresher. Maybe I do need to just kind of work on a little bit of stuff. In no way does it mean that you're back to where you started. Not at all.
And it could be a taste, a touch,
Yes.
a smell, an anniversary date or time.
Yes.
It could be any of those things that all of a sudden triggered you. And then it doesn't mean that it's PTSD. It just means you could be having a moment. But that's
Yes.
when I say open up and talk to a professional. So you can be, don't push the feeling away. Don't say, oh my God, that taste or that touch or that smell, I'm just going to bury the feeling because I don't want to deal with it. I think when you bury the feelings and those emotions, that it takes it to the next level, correct?
Yes.
If you don't deal and heal through it.
Yeah, because it's your body, like I was, your body doesn't let that go. Just on its own, it's not letting it go, right? But working through it, recognizing that and knowing that, and that's part of doing the work in the first place, is being able to recognize those things and recognizing those triggers, so that when they do come up, you can recognize, okay, that's a trigger. That's what that is. That's a trigger. It's not happening in this moment. It's not right now. This is a trigger though. And what do I do when I feel this trigger? What can I do when this happens? And your support system is going to be a huge part of that.
And not being afraid. I think that comes with the stigmas again.
Yes.
Because like if I take my glasses off, I can hardly see. Now
Right.
I'm here anyway, right?
Right.
But the stigmas in today's climate don't come with the glasses in a sense, right? So you're not afraid to go around, like I'm not afraid to be on Zoom with my glasses. I'm not embarrassed to tell my family or friends that I have to wear glasses, that I'm older or whatever, right? But with the stigma with PTSD, some people feel like that's a stigma if I tell my friends or family. But really, it's no different than if I had to wear glasses, if I had to be in a wheelchair, if I had diabetes and I had to take insulin. So that's why I'm always telling people, try to detour away from the stigmas, because you wouldn't if you had to be in a wheelchair or wear glasses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And along with that too is the stigma of seeking help for it.
Mm-hmm.
The stigma of saying, well, I'm going to go to therapy, or I'm going to go see a psychiatrist, or and kind of along those lines is that I'll try to explain to people that, you know, so if you got, say, strep throat, right? Would you just sit at home and go, well, gosh, this is really awful. I can't eat, I can't sleep, I'm in so much pain, I can't even take medicine because my throat is so swollen up, but I'm just going to stay home because I don't want anyone to know, and I don't want the doctor to know that I have strep throat, right? Like, would you just stay home and do that? Or would you go to the doctor and say, hey, I need help with this, I need to figure out what I can do and address it, you know? And same thing is being able to, you know, go and get help for this, that we've got to reduce that stigma around getting help for it.
Which is really good. Which is really good, because where can someone, not to interrupt you, but where can someone go to get help if they feel like they're having some triggers and trauma, and maybe they're looking at the symptoms and they're like, oh my gosh, I think I have PTSD. Where should they go, or what should they do?
So, I mean, I would say Casa, because we work so much with that. We're doing so much work, trauma-informed care.
And that's Casa de la Familia, just so.
Casa de la Familia. We have an office in Santa Ana. We have a location in Santa Ana, we have a location in Fullerton, and we have a location in Los Angeles. And right now, we're doing telehealth. So, I mean, you aren't even coming into the office, you're doing telehealth. So it's so much more, I would say, convenient and easier to even do that. But we are, and I think in the chat box, I think that Michelle listed all of our information, and also the things that we are doing there, the programs that we have, and but we are working predominantly with trauma and different things that are related to that. So we work with victims of crime. And most often when we're working with victims of crime, we're looking at trauma. We're working with human trafficking, that's trauma. We have a sexual assault and sexual abuse group for teenagers. Again, trauma. And so, I think, is so important. Like, and taking that first step is so hard. And we recognize that. Taking that step to call or to send a message or to do something to say, hey, look, I want to find out if I can get help. I want to find out if this is going on. But taking that first step is so, so important. And all of our clinicians there are working with people with trauma. They have experience with that. And so you're not going to get someone that doesn't understand that. You're not going to have someone that isn't equipped to work with that.
Well, and if they felt, I believe that at Casa de la Familia, doing amazing work, amazing therapists, if they felt that they couldn't help you at a certain point, they would refer you to someplace else, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
So,
if we don't have what they need, then yes, absolutely. We have partners that we work with that we would be able to refer to.
mm-hmm.
Yes.
So what do you think some families and friends can do to help if someone comes to them and says, is diagnosed with PTSD, or the family or friends may know that something's going on, but they just don't know, how can I help my loved one? What should I do? What can they do?
I would say first and foremost is being present. Be present with them. Be there to listen. And when I say listen, I mean really listen. So just listening to what they say, not trying to give them options of what they should do, not trying to tell them how they can get fixed or what they should do or shouldn't do. They need to just hear that you're there and hear that you care. And once they know that, so establishing kind of that trust and that, that you're genuinely there to listen, you're going to have a much better chance of them saying, maybe it's, hey, where could I, do you know of anywhere I could go? Or do you have, something, but you first and foremost offering to listen and then genuinely listening to what is going on and genuinely hearing what they're going through. That's going to give them a safe place to go. Patricia talked a lot about having someone to talk to, having that person. And that's how this all starts, because if we go up to someone and we just say, you know what, I think you have PTSD, I think you should go and get help. Okay, they're not going to, that's just going to 100%, you're going to shut down the conversation. It's going to be done. They're not going to hear it, right? And they're not going to want to hear it. And they're also not going to come to you if they're feeling like they're having something going on, because they already feel like all you're going to do is tell them to go get help. Now, once they've started to tell you about it, and once they've started being more open, then I would say having that conversation. Maybe it's, could I help you to look for somewhere that maybe, we could, you would have someone to talk to. Like, I love talking, I love hearing, I love that you come to me and you share this and I can listen to you. But I feel like I may be not equipped to help you as much as someone who is a professional in this could. Right. And so we don't want to close the door of I don't want you to talk to me, or I don't want to hear what's going on. But we also want to recognize what our limitations are in terms of that as well.
And you said something that was really, really important, and I always use, is listening to someone, but hearing them.
Yes.
And there's a difference between listening and hearing someone. So listen to them and hear them, and then meet them where they're at. Don't meet them where you're at, because where you're at is completely different than where they're at. And like you said, I love what you said is being able to listen and hear them, but then also maybe spend a little bit of time when you're not with them and look up some resources. You know, you can Google, you can look for some in the community. I suggest you call Casa de la Familia or Crime Survivors.
Right.
You know, but otherwise, you know, look in the community that you're living in and residing in, and just, you know, you can Google PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. You can find out a lot of resources that you could help. You know, sometimes if the trigger is so strong and you're listening and you're hearing them, but what do you do at that moment is 4-7-8 breathing. I'm a true
Yes.
believer of 4-7-8 breathing.
Yes.
If you're not familiar with it, it's breathing in through your nose 4, you hold it a count of 4, you then, you know, you hold it for 7, and then you whoosh it out for 8. So it's breathing in 4, holding it 7, whooshing it out 8, 4 consecutive times. At that triggering moment, even for yourself or somebody else, it can be life-changing. I live by it in my day-to-day work. Actually, why don't we do that right now?
I was
If
going
that's
to say,
okay?
why don't you lead us in that, Patricia? Because I think it
Yes.
does. I think until you've experienced it, you can't really understand how it really resets for you what's going on. So yeah, would you be willing to do that? I think that
Yeah,
would be so
absolutely. And then you can Google it or you can email me and I'll send you the information too.
fun.
But I'm not going to talk through the whole thing. So if you want, you can close your eyes if you'd like to. You can whatever. Just watch. I'll hold up my hand so that you can do it. But so we're going to breathe in 4. So again, breathe in 4. Again, 4. Again, 4. Now we can all go to sleep. It takes you to a different spot. At least it does for me. Hopefully it does to you. Try it during your day, challenging times, you feel triggered, you feel that trauma coming on. It sometimes it can take a while to get used to it, right? Some people don't want to close their eyes, especially if they're triggered and the trauma is there, and for many reasons. You can try it with your eyes closed. You can try it when you're taking a bath. You can try it whether you're at the park. And sometimes you don't have to whoosh it out so loud because you can do it around other people and they don't even know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good one. And it does, it resets in your brain too. Like it just resets you and gives you a fresh start.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think there are stigmas? Like, why are there stigmas? Why is the shame, the guilt with PTSD still happening in 2020?
You know, I think people just, I think still we have this kind of misconception that we need to be strong and that we shouldn't share things that we've experienced, or this kind of misconception that if we have experienced some sort of trauma, then that makes us look weak, or it weakens who we are, which is absolutely not the case. I'd actually challenge that with saying that most of the people that I've worked with that have experienced a trauma or have PTSD are actually stronger. That they are not weaker because of that, they're actually stronger. And it's given them more of an empowerment and more of, you know, especially once they've worked through that, once they've worked on it and they've worked through it, that it's actually given them so much more strength. But I think as a society, we still have this misguided conception that if we've experienced some sort of trauma, some sort of crime, some sort of, and I think even when, I think partly it's even as we talk about society is that when we say a victim, like that it almost, it gives, when we say victim versus when we say survivor, they carry very different connotations. And so I think even in that sense is that when people are identified as a victim, we almost kind of, it takes on almost that role of like a weakness or like something was wrong, versus when we take on the role of a survivor, which is anyone who's experienced anything trauma and has come out on the other side of it as a survivor, right? But that we don't always identify it that way. And I think that's a big piece of where the stigma continues to come from.
Right. So what should a victim look for to know that they may have PTSD? Do you have things that you really think that they should acknowledge or look for?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll tell you just some of the, we kind of talked in the beginning about what some of the kind of symptoms or the things that that we're looking at. So like as a clinician, what we're looking at when you're coming in and telling us is that we're looking at if you're having intense feelings or just stress and reminders of a tragic event. So again, it could be anything. But if you're having these extreme reactions to it, or you're feeling like you're reliving it, and those aren't just thoughts or like mental reactions. That could be physical reactions as well, or physical feelings. So it could be nausea, so you could have an upset stomach. It could be headaches, your heart pounding, excess sweating, all of those things. So like a lot of times people will say to me, no, I don't, nothing, not the trauma, it doesn't bother me. But they're reporting all of these physical symptoms that they've been having, right? And they're like, no, but I just have these physical things going on. Like, but I don't think about it, or I don't really, it doesn't cross my mind. But I've had a stomach ache for like 6 months, right? And I've been to the doctor and they can't find anything wrong. Well, okay, but it's because it's their trauma manifesting that in that way, right? And so it can present itself in a physical way. Also, if you're having invasive memories about it, that an invasive being like you aren't sitting down thinking about it and going, let me recall what happened, but they're there. They're just popping up in your head, and they're just there, and you feel like you don't have control over that. Nightmares, absolutely. We're like, that's a big one. Trouble sleeping and nightmares. Just frightening recollections, waking up feeling like you're in that place. So maybe you had a nightmare, but it's such a real nightmare, waking up feeling like you're in that place again, or you're experiencing that again. We're looking at if you're feeling a loss of interest in any activities or daily activities. So maybe that looks like even just getting up and showering, going to the market, doing the just quote unquote normal things that you've done, but now you have no interest in doing those things. Feeling
if you're isolating yourself, turning to maybe alcohol or drugs or food.
Those, absolutely. Feeling emotionally numb. And then feeding that ties into what you're saying, Patricia, feeding that with alcohol or drugs and trying to kind of keep that numb feeling, right? Because if you don't feel numb, you feel like you might feel all of those other things, right? So either feeling numb or doing those things to keep yourself numb so that you're not feeling things. Having a sense of hopelessness. So like not really looking at the future, not feeling like you even have a future. That being kind of stuck just in this present and that there isn't a future out there for you. I'd say kind of, we talked about avoiding people or places and activities, especially things that might remind you of what happened. And that absolutely is a huge one that we're looking at. And another one, and this is very common, but is difficulty remembering pieces or parts of what happened. And what happened, and I really want to encourage you, that doesn't mean that you need to search for those things and find them and know them. our brains are super powerful, okay? And some of those things you may not ever get back because your brain protected you from that. And so I don't want you to hear me saying, like, because you don't remember these things, that you need to go and seek them out and find them. It may be that you don't remember those things because your brain protected you from that thing. And that's okay. But we talked before about the hypervigilance, feeling like you're just constantly on edge, looking over your shoulder, very aware of noises and things that you're hearing, always kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop. It's like you're kind of like the fight, flight, or freeze, but you're always heightened, right? Like you're just living in that heightened place. You're not ever coming down. And I would say heightened senses too. The heightened senses of being very aware, you know, feeling like you literally hear everything, and that you're constantly scanning and seeing. But I know I'm telling you like all these things, like I'm giving you all.
It's a lot to take in all at once, but it's good to listen and to hear this, because some people don't realize that, you know, joint pain or the food or the alcohol or all looking over your shoulder or seeing someone and you think, I know that's my abuser. I know that's my abuser when he's incarcerated, and it could possibly be, but you're thinking that that's person. You're thinking somebody is going to come and get you. So those are all signs to be able to say, you know what, maybe I need to reach out to a therapist. Maybe I need to talk to my doctor. Maybe I need to talk to a friend or a loved one about this. Because the other side of it is, if you don't acknowledge and pay attention to it, which I'm going to ask you, Jeniffer, is if this is a fact, but, you know, within today's climate, even in 2020, suicide the statistics are to an extreme right now for suicide. So I'm wondering if you could share, if you feel that, you know, if you don't acknowledge and pay attention to all of these kind of symptoms and the signs and the feelings and the emotions, could PTSD be part of suicide? Could it be one of the causes and reasons why our numbers are so high today?
It absolutely can. Yeah. And I think part of that is I know we keep saying it, but part of it is going back to the stigma. And part of it is going back to the fact that people aren't necessarily getting the treatment that they need. And that, you know, I talked about one of the symptoms could potentially be feeling so hopeless that there's no future. And part of that hopelessness can often be not only that there's no future, but that there's nothing more than what you have right now. That there's nothing more than these symptoms you're experiencing right now. There's nothing more than reliving these events over and over and over. And who wants to live like that? Like, that's not something you want to live with. And if you're in that and you feel like there is no other way out of that, which there is, but if you feel like you're so in that place and there isn't any way out and there's no future for you, then suicide may look like in that moment that that's something that would be an out. And so are they connected? I would say absolutely they can be connected.
Got it. And that's another thing.
I want to follow that up by saying there is treatment. You don't have to stay in that place. That does not have to be the end all. Like, absolutely not.
No, and it's reaching out. Again, it's being able to, you know, there's hotlines, you know, 24/7 hotlines. If you can't get to your therapist, there is the National Lifeline. Call and reach out.
Well, and there's texting now too. You can text. Like I've heard people say, like, I don't feel comfortable talking on the phone, or I don't want to. Now there's even texting. Like you don't even have to speak to someone. You can now text with them. There's so many options out there. Yeah.
And it's talking to a professional. I mean, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a professional, but if you call me, I'm going to lead you and guide you and direct you to a professional to where you can get. And you know, we talked about a lot of different, you know, diagnoses and a lot of different stuff with PTSD, but some of those could be underlining as well. You could have a headache, a migraine. That doesn't mean you have PTSD.
No.
Joint pain doesn't mean you have PTSD.
No.
You could have depression, you could have anxiety, or you could just be an old lady like me, and that's it. You know,
there could be so many things, and absolutely, and that's why it is important to go to a therapist. Like your therapist is trained, is trained to know, like, to sift out these things, and truly to have a diagnosis of PTSD, you have to have a number of those things that I listed. So you're not going to walk in and say, "Well, I have nightmares," and they're going to say, "Okay, you have PTSD," right? Like, that's not what we're looking at, right? We're looking at the whole of that. We're looking at that whole list. And then we're saying, okay, how many of those symptoms do you meet? How much of that criteria do you meet? And then is it PTSD? But absolutely, you may be experiencing anxiety. You may be experiencing depression. You may be just experiencing a difficult time, right? Like you're just having some nightmares right now. That doesn't mean that it's 100% going to be PTSD. And I really I always like to joke that Google is not your friend. Like, it's not. Like, do not go to Google and type in, do I have PTSD? And then look at what pops up, right? Like, please do not do that, right? Like, when you go to a therapist, they've studied this, they've learned this, they continue to learn about this. And that's why they can say to you, yes or no, or that's where that comes from. But Google, I just always try to tell people, like, please do not go. Like if you went to Google, you would find, you would, at the end of the day, think you have 3,000 things that you do not have. Okay, so please do not use that as your diagnostic tool.
Yeah. So what other things do you think that for people that are listening or on here today or see this at a later time, are diagnosed with PTSD, or they're really just wondering and they don't like the stigma of that diagnosis, so they're convincing themselves that they don't have that or they don't want to share that? What would you say to them?
I think, again, just saying that that this is not something to be ashamed of. This is something that has made them stronger. It's made them who they are. And that's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to try to hide. It's not a negative. And if they are not in therapy, then I would encourage therapy to be able to help them to work through that stigmatization, to work through that that feeling of needing to hide that piece of them, or of who they are, and being able to, and I would really encourage that they have someone that they trust, that they can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Because even in therapy, that's one of the biggest pieces is working on your support system outside of the therapy room. And having someone that you can talk to, and that they're going to listen. Right. Again, hear you and listen to you. Yeah.
So if anybody has questions or comments, please either text them to me or please add them in the Zoom chat. That's the way I'm going to call on the questions, so that you'll have that. A question is I'm finally unpacking boxes from my storage unit, and I keep finding stuff from time to time from my abuser. Pictures, mementos of good gifts, jewelry. Do I throw it all away, delete all social media and pictures, keep the jewelry? So, like, for someone in that is asking that question, what would you suggest and say to them?
So I think that's a great question. I think it's a big question, though. And I think it's a question that I can't necessarily just tell you what to do, first and foremost. It sounds like it's more of a lifetime. Like, you have many things that, and I think that I would say that that's something that I would really encourage you to not do anything hastily. But I would encourage, I don't know if you have a therapist or maybe looking for a therapist, but being able to work through that, being able to have a place to talk through that and to work through, what do those things mean to you? What do those things, are there things, do you want to choose certain pieces of that are important to you, that do have positive, meaning to them? And then are there other things that you want to discard of, or that it would be empowering for you to be able to let those things go? But I do think that it's something to work through. I don't think it's something I can necessarily just tell you one way or the other, because I think that it's kind of a more in-depth question.
And I've heard that before, and I think a lot of people, everybody's different on how they would handle, I think that. So I think that my suggestion, and again, I'm not a therapist, but my suggestion is always, work through the feelings and emotions that come with each individual item. If you're ready to part with the item, then you can part with the item. If it's because you're feeling the trauma at that moment, I think working through it and talking about it before you get rid of the item, or just go and say, I'm changing everything all of a sudden, I'm getting rid of everything, because then you may regret it and look back and really think about, you didn't deal with the feelings and the emotions that came with those items.
Yes.
So that would be my suggestion, is always work through the feelings and the emotions.
Yes.
Another question is, my question is that I do have PTSD as raising children with fear to lose them due to the fact that I lost Aaliyah after kidnapped, drugged, and murdered. So this is a mom that her daughter was murdered, and that she has PTSD. And how does she work through that with the fear of losing her other children?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, talking about having so much strength, like, I have to commend you, like, even sharing that with us here. Thank you for sharing that. I have to go back to that. That's something I would very much encourage, that you reach out to a therapist, that you have a safe place to process through those feelings, because absolutely what you are experiencing is completely normal. That's something, that completely normal to be experienced in those feelings. But I would encourage that you have a place to work through those feelings, a place to talk through that, and a place to learn coping skills. I'm not going to say that that's going to be taken away by going to therapy, that fear, or that kind of that potential trigger. But I do think that it can absolutely help. Yeah, I would very much encourage that.
And you are doing, and I know you, so you are doing everything that you possibly can to be able to cope and deal and to heal, and to just be able to give it that time, to be able to have the support system, your loving family, your children, your husband, to be there with you to help you, and you to help him, and to keep the memory and the legacy alive of her, as you are doing, I know. And so to continue on doing what you're doing, because you are brave and courageous and strong, and this PTSD and everything else, you'll, as we talk about, you never have closure, you never have that, but being able to move forward and being able to deal and cope and heal through that. So you are already doing it, and we're proud of you to be able to ask the question, and to be able to have the healing, that you are working through that process.
And I see that it looks like you've been in therapy for years, and without knowing, what that therapy's been like, or what you've done, I would encourage that if you feel like you're not necessarily getting what you need out of therapy, that, as Patricia and I both kind of talked about earlier, is that it may be time to look for a different type of therapy, maybe a different therapist, but it may be time to look for a little something different. If it feels like you're not necessarily getting what you're feeling like you need in that, it may be time for that. And again, that's perfectly fine. I can't speak necessarily to what you're experiencing, but I would say that could be, it may be time for that as well.
And I agree. I always say that, if you're stuck where you're at, you may never have closure, you may never have 100% healing of anything that you're going through. You are changed. It is different circumstance and situation. But if you still are feeling the trauma and the triggers and all of that, 24/7, and it's a constant thing, and yet you're still going to therapy, it may be time to check to see about a different therapist, or a different technique, or different support group, or different organization, or different whatever that is, to be able to help and work through that. Because there is hope for healing, right? There absolutely is. So just in respect to everyone's time, because I know we've been here for an hour, and we acknowledged and honored that we would have this today for an hour. But I want to give an opportunity for anyone else that does, if they do have any other last minute questions, they can add into the chat section or a comment. But I also just wanted to really thank you, Jennifer, for doing this in collaborative partnership today with Casa de la Familia, with Crime Survivors. We're so grateful for this, and it only starts the dialogue. We can't cover everything in an hour, right?
No, no. Thank you so much for having me, and Casa. And absolutely, this is just an opening dialogue. We can't cover all that much in an hour, and so this is just an opening dialogue about that.
And with that said, to end it today, what would you like to end it on regarding the stigmas, the maybe the shame or the blame or the guilt with PTSD? And what is maybe one thing that someone could do after today if they're feeling like, well, maybe I have PTSD?
So I would encourage, I think there's like 60 of you here, right? Like, I would love if like each of you just had a conversation with someone about what PTSD is, right? That you went to a webinar, you attended something, and share with them one thing that you learned about it. Because you know what, if you share that, if 60 people go and share that with 60 other people, and then what if only half of them go and share it with someone else, right? Like, but let's all, I would love if we all committed to helping to reduce the stigma behind it and helping to just have open conversations about it, right? Like just being open about it, talking about it, saying those words out loud. And maybe you haven't experienced PTSD, and that's okay. You don't have to be afraid to talk about it just because you haven't experienced it. But if we each just took a moment to share with one person, I think that right there is already going to start to reduce that stigma. And I think that we just need to continue to do that. Continue being open to having conversations, continue to be open to learn more about it. If you know someone who you think may have it, then do some more research into it. Like, we've only given you a tip of the iceberg about what this is. There's a great book that I absolutely love. It's meaty, but it's The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks so much about trauma and PTSD and how literally, I kind of touched on a little bit how our body holds on to that and knows it. And so that's a great way to learn more about it. And if you, Patricia, you asked if you are experiencing what you think could potentially be PTSD, or even just a traumatic event. Maybe you don't feel like it's maybe PTSD, but you want to talk to someone about it. I encourage you to reach out. I encourage you to reach out to a therapist. I encourage you to reach out. Maybe you're not ready for a therapist yet. I encourage you to reach out to a trusted friend, someone that's going to listen, someone, and maybe you feel like, I hear this too, like, well, I don't have any friends or I don't have any family that I can talk to. Then call the hotline, text a hotline. You can do it anonymously. They don't have to know any details about you, but they're there to listen and they're there to hear you. And so no matter where you are in your journey, there is an opportunity for you. There's something you can do today. And maybe today looks like you writing it down, that you write it down and you put it on your calendar that you're going to do it. Okay. Maybe today is looking up the phone number. Maybe that's what today looks like. Maybe today doesn't look like picking up the phone or texting. Maybe today looks like just writing down that number. But maybe tomorrow looks like, you know what, I'm going to pick up the phone. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be right away, but acknowledging it and starting to take those steps is what's so important.
I agree. And, if you have additional questions or comments, you can reach out to myself or Jennifer after today, or Casa de la Familia, Crime Survivors. Feel free to reach out to us. We will be there to help and support and guide and answer any questions that we can. But don't be afraid to reach out for that help and support, because again, today we can't cover all of that. We can't answer everything in one day, right? So I think it is being able to just talk about it and reach out and again, listen and hear to someone and end the stigmas, because
Yes.
If you go on today, when you get off of this Zoom and you go on and you open up the dialogue on your social media, I know you probably all posted something else on your social media that you had chocolate cake or a steak or something else. So what if you go in and you post on your social media about post-traumatic stress disorder? And letting people know that if they need a resource, if they need the support to be able to talk about it and reach out, or the National Lifeline, or post about Casa de la Familia or Crime Survivors, and letting people know, because you may have a friend, you may have someone on your social media page that's hurting right now and they don't know how to get the help or support, but by you posting that, they may reach out for the help and support, and you could save a life, you could change a life.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And this, you know, a way too for you to open that up. Maybe you're thinking, well, that's going to be kind of awkward, or like, how do I share that? Or what do I, but let me give you a tip that this is PTSD Awareness Month, right? So no one's going to think it's weird, right? Share a graphic. Like, I think, you know, we have it on our social media at Casa de la Familia. I think probably Crime Survivors does too. Share a graphic about it. And then maybe you write a little something like, hey, I attended a webinar today about this. I just wanted to share this information. And it has listed on there the phone number. It has that it's PTSD Awareness Month. You don't even have to create your content.
Right.
You can just share it, and it's PTSD Awareness Month. And so there you go. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask one more question before we end. I want to get this question in.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is by somebody here that said, if you went through a traumatic event as a teen and got therapy, why is it that now as an adult, when I talk about it, I still cry?
Yeah. So kind of going back to what we said about therapy being an ebb and flow and that triggers can happen. I would say that it sounds like that's potentially what's happening. And that you know, again, the ebb and flow is that you know, it happened as a teen, you had therapy as a teen, but now it may be time to revisit that. It may be time to work through it because you're in a different phase, and lots of things can come up with that without knowing your whole story or knowing what's going on. Lots of different things in life can trigger that. Some of those things can be that when we have kids, and if those kids are the same age as maybe when we had a trauma, that can bring up some things for us. Sometimes just having an experience that, you know, we see something. It could be as simple as you were watching a movie and you saw something that then re-triggered it inside of you, and now your brain is back to that place and thinking about those things, and on a you know, a subconscious level, and that when you talk about it, it's kind of overflowing again. And so I would say that, you know, if you're feeling like that's something that's coming up again, I might consider revisiting therapy and revisiting it now, because your experience is going to be very different than when you were a teen.
And it's also okay to cry. Now, if you're crying
Absolutely.
for hours at a time or days, and it's every single day that you're crying, or if it was just a taste or a touch or a smell
Yeah.
or a memory, or you were explaining to someone in a conversation what happened to you and all of a sudden you break down and cry, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you have PTSD. That doesn't mean
Right.
it means you're having a moment. We all cry. We all have, it happened to us. So we have those feelings and emotions. But I think if it's on a regular basis, and if it's every time you talk about it, every time you share, then I would say, yes, reach out for therapy. Yeah. So I thank you all. We're truly, truly grateful for Jeniffer's knowledge and her education and her compassion and her passion for this, as well as for all of you to attend and to be able to take this time to care about the stigmas and PTSD, and to learn more, to be able to pass it on to other individuals that may need help, and that you could also reach out for help and support. So don't be afraid. It takes all of us, and all of us on here today, we have a right and a responsibility to end the stigmas for ourselves and for our community. So I thank you all very much, and we wish you a blessed, blessed day today.